picture shows you, for instance, that I made this picture actually. So this picture comes from a data set that I use for my research, which is called a Fiji data set. Is a survey that was conducted in 2008, so it's a bit old, but it is very useful because it was conducted before the Great Recession, so before the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy. So it has been. I used it in several research papers that I wrote in order to study industrial dynamics during the crisis. This is my main research field, so that's why I used it. So it's a survey. So they basically went to more than I would say, if I remember correctly, like it is a kind of 30,000 companies across different European countries, mainly manufacturing companies, and they asked to them several questions about innovation, human capital, science, financial indicators, and things like that. And they also asked a question about who is the main shareholder in the company and how many share this shareholder has. And they asked this both for firm in which the main shareholder is domestic and for firm in which the main shareholder is foreign. Okay, so they go to an Italian company, they ask who is the main shareholder. It's company X. Is this company Italian? Okay, what is the main share that they have? Is the main shareholder foreign? So it's a company Y that comes from China. What is the share that they have in the company? Okay, and what I'm showing you here for different countries, Austria, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and UK, I'm showing the average share that is owned when the main shareholder is domestic, which is the blue or like light blue line, and what is the average share of the capital stock that is owned by the main shareholder when the main shareholder is foreign. Okay, which is the kind of pink or light red bar. So when you see this graph, anything comes to you? So any comments on this graph you can have? What is it that it clearly comes out from this? Anybody wants to try? I show you the graph again. So you see the light blue bar is the average share when the main share of when the main shareholder of the company is domestic. The red bar is the average share when the main shareholder of the company is foreign. What clearly comes out from this graph is what? Nobody wants to try?
I want to try.
Okay.
Is that when the shares owned by the home company is lower to have to be the main shareholder to be the main shareholder, the outside or the foreign company needs higher number to have to be a share to be the main shareholder.
Exactly. This is exactly the point. Okay, so it shows you that when the main shareholder is foreign, in all countries, in some countries this is clearer than in some others, but when on average, when the main shareholder is foreign, this main shareholder has a much larger share compared to the cases in which the main shareholder is domestic. In Italy, for instance, when the main shareholder is foreign, it has on average the 70% of the share. Okay, it owns 70% of the capital stock. When the main shareholder is domestic, it has a little bit more than 50%. Okay, so why is it the case that when the main shareholder is foreign, the share is much larger than when the main shareholder is domestic? Well, the main reason is that to manage from distance, to have control from distance is difficult, rather than to have control of a company that operates in your same country for several reasons. Okay, maybe because you have problems with communication, you have problem with transportations, or maybe because you have problem with timelines, so things like that. I mean, for several reasons, and we will have time to discuss about them. Managing a company from distance is always difficult, but it's more difficult when you have to manage a company from distance and this company is operating in a different country, which implies, therefore, that oftentimes companies find it convenient when they buy stock of a foreign company and they want to acquire control of that foreign company. Firms find it convenient to acquire lots of share of that foreign company, because if they acquire few shares, they probably are worried that that capital stock, even though it's larger than 10%, is not enough to have actual control of the foreign company. Okay, so in a sense, this is just, I just put this graph here just to show you that the two things, the 10% threshold that is identified by the IMF, it's not a very good measure on one hand. On the other, to show you that ownership, however, it is still an important metric to have a sense of how much you can control a company. Okay, because the more you own shares of a company, the more you are able to actually be effective in making your decisions valid, or in a sense to have authority on what is going on in the foreign company. Okay, so the larger is your share, the greater the authority you have in order to make your decisions mandatory in a certain way in the foreign company. And since it is more difficult to do this when you operate, when you want to manage a company from distance and this company is in another country, oftentimes you end up with the distribution of the shares like the one that is represented in this graph. As I was saying at the beginning, there are some differences across countries. In UK, for instance, this difference probably is not even statistically significant, but in most of the other countries, actually, you clearly see this difference in the average share that are owned by domestic and foreign main shareholder. Questions, doubts? Okay. If there are no questions and doubts, let's go on with the second condition. The second condition that I was discussing before is the idea of ability to manage. So in order to have control, you don't need only to have ownership, so to own capital, but you also need to be able to manage the company. Okay, so equity control, so the ownership of capital, is a necessary condition, but not sufficient to have control. In order to be able to have managerial control, you also require a suitable system of communication and organization of business across country that allows you to actually be able to directly manage, to directly tell the other company what to do in different situations. Okay, so prior to World War I, there were several firms that had assets whose assets were owned by foreigners. So that were owned. So there were lots, for instance, of U.S. companies that were partially owned by UK investors. But at that time, neither the systems of communication nor the type of organization of business that was available made it possible, for instance, for UK investors to be really able to actually having control of what was going on in the US companies. Okay, so in that case, it is not possible to talk about actual multinational companies. In particular, there is another definition that is used in the literature, but these other companies can be better defined as freestanding enterprises. So they were basically enterprises operated by US managers. So they were the US managers that were making and taking the most relevant decisions, but the owners of the company were, for the largest part, from the UK. But since these owners didn't have actual ability, because they didn't have the infrastructure, and they didn't have the organizational principle that were sufficient for them to actually manage the US companies from the UK, these companies, even though from the financial point of view could be classified as multinational company, they were not multinational company in the way in which we understand multinational company today.